Okay, it is officially 4:04. I'm sure we'll have some people joining as we go, but we're going to get started because we have a lot to get through. I'm excited to have you all with us virtually today. My name is Juliet Eisenstein. I'm an attorney at Advocates for Children, and I'm going to be joined today by my colleagues, Alex Elagudin and Oriana Golfarini, and presenting to you all on transitioning to adulthood for students with disabilities. So to start off, we are going to do a brief introduction about who AFC is and, what this presentation will entail. And then we are going to do a quick overview of the right to stay in school. And then we're going to dive into the meat of the presentation, which will be transition planning on the IEP. And finally, we will finish up with a discussion of transition services that you or your students that you're working with can access. So before we dive in, I'm going to be taking on the first part of this presentation. Alex will be doing the last portion of the presentation, and Oriana is going to be monitoring the questions that come in throughout the presentation. She's also able to respond to questions in Spanish. If folks feel more comfortable writing in the Q&A in Spanish, we ask to the extent possible that folks leave their questions in the Q&A instead of in the chat to make sure that we get to everything. And we will be pausing after each section to go over any questions. So feel free to write them whenever, and we will make sure to get to them in the intervals between each section. Okay. So to start, who is AFC or what is AFC? We are an independent agency that works to protect the rights of all New York City students. We were founded in 1971 by parents of students with disabilities, and our mission has expanded over the years. We are now made up of around 50 attorneys and social workers who support students and families throughout the New York City system in a wide array of educational issues, including early childhood, charter schools, students experiencing homelessness, students who are involved in the child welfare and criminal justice systems, and many other different sectors of the education system. If you're ever looking for help, you can always call our helpline at the number in the slide. And we also have a ton of resources online. All of the resources that we provide, as well as the legal services that we provide, and workshops and trainings like this are free. And you can also reach out via our website for help as well, if that is easier. Okay, and now we would love to know who's with us today. So I'm gonna have Oriana launch our first poll. If you all can just take a few seconds to let us know what role you all are in and where in New York you're coming from. Yeah, awesome. So seeing almost a lot of advocates and parents, which is great to see, and a lot of representation across 4 of the 5 boroughs. No one from Staten Island, but otherwise all of them are covered. Okay, we have about 80% participation. Oh, and now 93. Okay, great. So awesome. It looks like most of you are advocates, service providers, or parents. So this training will definitely be geared towards all of you. And despite our lack of representation in Staten Island, it's good to see that we have a very diverse showing from all of the rest of the boroughs of New York. Okay. I will quickly share the results so that you all can see. And now we are going to take one more quick poll, a quick pretest, just to get a sense of what knowledge everyone is coming in with. No worries. This is not an actual graded exam. We just want to get a sense of where everyone is coming to us from, and we'll take a fun little post test, but it's only 2 questions. And we'll reveal the answers at the end of this presentation. Oh no. And the first one appears to be a trick question because the answers are both the same. Okay. Well, one of those should say 22, but that's okay. That is here and out an impossible question to answer, but we'll take your answers to number 2. Okay. We can pretend like the bottom answer for number 1 is 22, if that helps. I'm guessing you probably can't resubmit your polls if you already have. We're going to go ahead and end it, but at least for number 2, most people have said that true, the DOE does have to help all students with IEPs prepare for life after high school. And everyone said 21 is the age that you can stay in school until, and we will find out the answers to both of those very soon. Okay. So now into the meat of the presentation. So first, I just want to quickly go over the right to stay in school, because obviously how long you can stay in school impacts how long you can and should legally be entitled to receive transition services. So students must stay in school until the end of the school year in which they turn 17. An important thing to note here is that the school year, for purposes of mandatory attendance, starts on July 1st. So if you turn 17 on July 2nd, that means that you have to stay in school that entire school year until June 30th of the following year. Students may stay in school until the end of the school year in which they turn 21, or until they get a diploma, whichever comes first. For the purposes of the right to stay in school, if you turn 21 over the summer, you're only going to be able typically to remain in school through the end of August. Whereas if you turn 21 September through May, you can stay in school through the end of the school year until that end of June, or even the following August if you need summer school. And there's actually a new update to the right to stay in school. Students with IEPs have the right to stay in school now until their 22nd birthday. So previously, excuse me, they only had the right to stay in school until the end of the school year in which they turn 21. And now students with IEPs can stay in school until their 22nd birthday, or until they earn a diploma, whichever comes first. This is a really recent change to New York City regulations. In fact, it's stemming from a court decision that came out of Connecticut, and New York State interpreted that to say that New York too has to let students stay in school until their 22nd birthday if they have an IEP. So if you're working with a family who, if you're working with a family who student is turning 22 this year, it's a great point of advocacy to share that court decision with the student's school and ask for that student to be able to stay in school through the end of that school year. Okay. I'm going to pause here for any quick questions about the right to stay in school before we move on to the meat of the presentation. You seeing anything, Oriana, that we should cover?
No questions as of right now.
Okay, great. Sorry, I think I'm not used to talking for this long and therefore struggling. Okay, so let's dive in to the meat of the presentation, which is transition planning on the IEP. So I'll say from the start, and as many of you probably already know, transition planning is a really broad area of advocacy. It looks different for every student. And the goal of this presentation is to give everyone the tools they need to be the best advocate they can be in the transition planning space. If you have specific questions about what a specific student is going through, feel free to drop those questions in the Q&A. We have tried our best to provide as much information as possible. And of course, within the constraints of a 60-minute webinar, we're not necessarily going to be able to cover every scenario that a student might encounter, but we will do our best. Okay, so where are the rights to transition planning coming from? There's three main laws that this presentation will be grounded in. The IDEA, or the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, which is the federal law that mandates a free and appropriate public education for all students with disabilities who are in the K through 12 system. There's the New York State Education Department regulations, otherwise known as the Part 200 regs, which interpret the federal law at the state level. And then there is the New York City Standard Operating Procedures Manual, which is New York City's interpretation of these laws and what they should look like as they are implemented in New York City classrooms. So this is just a quick grounding in where the rules that we're about to be speaking about coming from. They are coming from these three areas. Just to know that there is a legal hook to everything that we are about to cover. Okay, so just as a very broad overview, what does the law say about transition planning? So this is pulled and slightly consolidated from New York State's regulations, which interpret the IDEA. And they say when a student with a disability turns 15 and earlier, if appropriate, the IEP team must create a program for them, updated annually, that includes a statement of the student's needs, taking into account the student's strengths, preferences, and interests as they relate to transition from school to post-school activities, appropriate measurable post-secondary goals based upon age-appropriate transition assessments, needed activities to facilitate the student's movement from school to post-school activities, and a statement of the responsibilities of the school district and, when applicable, participating agencies for the provision of such services. So this is, in a much consolidated form, what the law says about transition planning. And now we're going to go bullet by bullet into what that means in actuality for a student in the New York City public school system or a student in a non-public school. Okay, so first, the law requires age-appropriate transition assessments. These must begin at age 12 for all students with IEPs at that age to identify student needs, strengths, preferences, and interests. The assessment is used to create a transition plan that is individualized, specific, and attainable for the student. And the goal is that this assessment is conducted each year to continually assess progress towards and appropriateness of a student's post-secondary goals. The ultimate goal of this assessment is to empower, educate, and prepare students for a successful future. So, in a very brief overview, the importance of a transition assessment, it's really key as a starting point for the student's transition planning process. It's the first step that's taken in the process to identify what the student needs, what their strengths are, what their interests are, and what needs to be done to get them to their goals. And the key word here as well is age appropriate. So the same assessment should not necessarily be conducted year in and year out. They need to be age appropriate and responsive to the student's needs given where they are in their educational trajectory. So what does a transition assessment require? So as I mentioned, they have to be conducted every year once a student with an IEP turns 12. These assessments should relate to job training, education, employment goals, and independent living if appropriate. It should cover all of those different areas. These assessments can take the form of interviews, interest inventories, hands-on activities, and simulated work experience. And in the next slide, I'm going to get into exactly how New York City interprets that to go over exactly what offerings New York City provides with regard to transition assessment. But before I get there, I want to make the really important point that if this transition assessment does not give you enough information, you as the parent or the advocate on behalf of the parent have the right to ask the DOE to pay for a private transition assessment. I cannot emphasize this point enough. Oftentimes, the DOE's transition assessments do not provide sufficient information, and you always have the right to send an email to the IEP team. Typically, they will conduct a transition assessment ahead of the IEP meeting, and if they don't, delay the IEP meeting until they have. You can write an email or a message to the IEP team and say, hey, this assessment doesn't give me enough information about my student, or hey, I kind of disagree with what this assessment has uncovered. Please issue funding for me to get an assessment done privately for my student. These are called independent educational evaluations, or IEEs. And the DOE either has to agree to your request to fund the IE, or they have to file an impartial hearing request to defend their decision not to give you that voucher to fund a private assessment. So it's a really great advocacy tool that parents can use to get the information they need in order to start the transition planning process. And I can say that I have never seen the DOE file an IHR to defend its choice not to give an IE, although obviously never say never. Okay, so if you are getting a transition assessment from the New York City Department of Education, what is it going to look like? So New York City has interpreted the regulations to basically create 3 different levels of transition assessments. The level 1 assessment that they do is the one that they do starting at age 12, and this is typically the assessment that they will do every single year until the student finishes high school. It encompasses interviews, or basically the student, teacher, and parent filling out paper interviews about the student's skills, abilities, hobbies, interests, what chores they help out with at home, what they can do independently. It's a good starting point for gathering a sense of what the student might be interested in and, what they're capable of. But by the time a student gets to high school and is starting to think about their post-secondary lives, it's typically not enough information. And at that point, you could, as I mentioned before, go to the DOE and say, hey, this doesn't provide enough information. I need an IE to get a private transition assessment that really more thoroughly and comprehensively evaluates my students' skills and abilities as they relate to transition. Like I said, you could also request a level 2 or a level 3 transition assessment from the DOE. These are not assessments that the DOE will offer to do without being requested, but they can always be requested by the family or the advocate to be conducted. The level 2 is supposed to be a 3 to 5 hour assessment with hands-on activities that replicate activities that might be done in a job setting. Typically, when a level 2 is requested from the DOE, instead, what they do is an interest inventory, which is just a student filling out a piece of paper, checking off boxes for what sounds interesting to them. This obviously does not meet the definition of the level 2 that is on our screen. And if that happens, you can again tell the DOE, hey, I disagree with this assessment because it is not what the regulations say a level 2 should require. Please issue me an IE so I can actually get a level 2 done independently. Finally, you can also request a level 3 transition assessment from the DOE. They will not offer it if not requested, but this is especially appropriate for a student who is in a CTE class or is in a school-connected internship where they can be shadowed for 10 days because this is a really long assessment. And they're in a real or a simulated work environment where someone from the school can assess the student, see how they're doing in that setting, and provide intel based on that. And that should actually be conducted if a student is in a job-like setting that's school connected. And if not, you should definitely request it. Okay, so these are the 3 different types of transition assessments that the DOE offers. None of them are perfect, but no matter what, they're a really important starting point for starting the exercise of thinking about what are the students' interests, what are their abilities, what are their skills, what are their hobbies, what might they want to do post-high school. The next part of the regulations require that after that transition assessment is done, the DOE has to create appropriate post-secondary transition goals for the student. This, unlike the assessments, which have to begin starting at age 12, the goals need to be created by the time a student is 15. So typically, the IEP team does this for the first time when the student is 14 and in their last year of middle school. and they can always be created earlier if appropriate. The goals should be based on results from the transition assessment, and they should be updated annually, as should the assessment. So as the assessment gets updated, as we learn more information about the student, their skills, their abilities, their interests, the goals should likewise be updated to reflect those evolving skills and interests. The post-secondary transition goals really focus on what are the students' goals for after high school. What are their educational goals? Do they want to go to college, a 2-year school, a trade school? What job training do they want? What employment do they want? And if they are going to need support with independent living, what is their ultimate goal? If they do want to work towards living independently? We want to make sure that these goals are SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. We want to make sure they're specific enough that they really speak to the student's interests and abilities, and that they're measurable so that we will know once a student has met those goals. And of course, we want to make sure that it's something the student can actually attain. This is like a realistic goal for the student to be working towards. If a student is not working towards a diploma and their post-secondary goal says that they want to go to medical school, then we need to take a step back and say that's not going to be attainable for the student, because you need a high school diploma in order to go to college and then on to med school. And if they're on a non-diploma bound track, this is not a realistic goal for them. So a quick example of what this can look like in an IEP. So we have a pretend student named Beth, whose goal is to become a veterinary technician. So her education goal is she wants to attend a 2-year college near home so that she can live at home while she's attending school and obtain a degree as a vet tech. For employment, the goal is for her to be gainfully employed as a vet tech at a vet clinic near home, and that she will apply to receive job coaching through Access VR while she is on the job. In terms of independent living, this is something that Beth needs more support with. And so she's going to live with her family while she's attending college. During that time, she's going to practice some of her independent living skills by opening a bank account and taking a financial literacy course. And after college, once she has employment and an income, she is going to seek out independent living, and hopefully will feel ready by that time to do so. These goals are not perfect, but we're assuming here that Beth has indicated an interest in this future goal during her assessment that was conducted. And you can see that there are modifications being made throughout these goals to support Beth at the level that she's at, such as by doing things near her home, by connecting with Access VR, by mentioning the need for a financial literacy course. So that's a helpful way to tailor the goals to what she needs. Another helpful way to make sure that a student is on the right track to working towards their transition goals is through the IEP's annual goals section. So this is a section that we often think of as relating to a student's academics and their related services. But this is also a really important area of the IEP to consider with transition planning. So we want to make sure that each of the annual goals are also helping the student ultimately work towards their post-secondary goals. So for instance, if Beth wants to apply to be a vet tech and those programs all require that she take physics, then we want to make sure that in Beth's annual goals, if she needs more support in her science classes, that's a goal that's being named in these annual goals to make sure that her IEP team is being held accountable to helping her work on that portion of her academics so that she is also working towards her post-secondary goals. So again, we want to make sure they're SMART, specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. It's especially important with the annual goals to really make sure that it's a goal the student can achieve in 1 year. And as I just mentioned, they can be both academic and functional. So they could be working on a science class skill, but also let's say Beth needs help with emotional regulation. That could be a counseling annual goal that's in her IEP as well, and something she's working on, because we know that ultimately in a stressful work environment, that is a goal that she is going to need to attain in order to be a successful employee. Okay, next, the law requires that the IEP team provide appropriate transition services and classes on the IEP. So this is an interesting section of the law. because it doesn't sound that exciting or interesting, but can actually be a really important part of the IEP in terms of making sure that it's really presenting accurate information about the student and accurately tracking their progress towards their goals. So again, by the time the student is 15 and earlier, if appropriate, this section is supposed to include a discussion of how the classes that the student is taking, as well as the related services that they're receiving, are helping them meet their transition goals. This section should also discuss progress towards graduation requirements. And again, we want to make sure that it's individualized, detailed, and specific to the student. So I'm just going to show an example of it because that will help to kind of ground what I'm really talking about. So in this example, we have Adam. To prepare Adam to meet his post-secondary goals, he will need to complete 44 credits of coursework, as New York City requires. Currently, he has 33 credits and needs to earn 11 this school year. He also needs to pass his ELA and math regents, and he will attend group speech therapy every week to work on his interpersonal communication skills and receive ELA sets to work on reading comprehension. Finally, Adam's computer science, geometry, and graphic design classes will help his future aspirations of working in advertising. So this is kind of a chunky section of the IEP, and it's really meant to make sure that the IEP team is thinking through how the academic courses that he's taking and the related services he's receiving are helping him work towards his post-secondary goals. So for Beth, again, that might be about her receiving extra help in science, or it could also talk about the related services of counseling that she's receiving to work on emotional regulation. And if a student is diploma bound, it should always, always, always discuss their progress towards a diploma. And this example is pulled straight from an IEP. Obviously, names have been changed, but generally, this is what it can and should look like. Okay, so next, perhaps the most important part of the IEP when it comes to transition is making sure that there are appropriate transition activities on the IEP. So this is basically where the IEP team makes sure that that magic can actually happen. So again, by the time a student is 15 and earlier, if appropriate, this section of the IEP is how we connect the student to their post-secondary goals. This is where the IEP team discusses what the student is going to get during their time in school to ensure that they will be ready once they leave high school to meet their post-secondary goals. I cannot emphasize enough how important this section is. And I often advise taking a lot of time on this section and being really thoughtful about it at an IEP team meeting to make sure that you as the advocate or parent know exactly what services your student is receiving and making sure that those services are specific and tailored to the student's post-secondary goals. So this section of the IEP has to include discussion of instruction, related services, and community experiences, and employment exploration as they relate to the student's post-secondary goals. And if relevant, it will also discuss the daily living skills that the student needs to work on, and if it's relevant for them to get the level 3 vocational assessment, such as if they're in a CTE course or doing a school-based internship. It should focus on activities that the student will engage in to meet transition goals. And really importantly, this section also will discuss who from the DOE will provide those activities to the student. So again, a really important thing to talk about at the IEP meeting to make sure there's full understanding of who is accountable for providing the services. I have seen the section of the IEP say that the parent and the family are responsible, and that should never be the case. And obviously, we want to make sure that this section is individualized, detailed, and specific. So here is an example of what this section of the IEP looks like. I know that this font is very small, but it just gives a general overview of what the categories are that the IEP team needs to cover. So in instruction, they should be focusing on the credits and exams the student needs to achieve their educational goals that they will need in order to meet their post-secondary goals. For related services, for a student like Beth, that's where they talk about getting the counseling to work on emotional regulation, maybe speech to work on interpersonal skills. It's a focusing on the related services the student needs to meet their post-high school goals. Community experiences is a really important section because that's one of the only places on the IEP where the DOE is being held accountable to help the student, for instance, identify a few different workplaces where they can job shadow or do informational interviews, or where they're going to research different types of professions that might be interesting to them. That's really about the student going out and exploring around them in order to work towards their post-secondary goals and figuring out what's interesting to them through job shadowing and internships and things like that. The next section, the post-school adult living objectives, is really where there's a focus on developing job skills like writing a resume, cover letter, doing a mock interview, more concrete skills like that. And then finally, if your student needs to work on living independently and building up daily living skills like hygiene practices, for instance, this section should be filled out. And if the student is in a school-based job program, the functional vocational assessment section should also be filled out. So this is really where the meat of the transition planning comes in, because it's where you're discussing what services the student will get. And later in this presentation, we'll be talking about some examples of actual transition services that a student could be working on or could be getting while they're in school. And again, I've said it before, but super important to specify who from the school will be doing what in that final column. Okay. So now at the IEP meeting itself, obviously all of those sections of the IEP take or constitute what the transition planning requirements are of the IEP. But it is extremely common that those sections do not get discussed in an IEP meeting. So this may sound super straightforward and intuitive, but make sure transition goals, activities, and services are discussed at the IEP meeting. If the student you're working with is in high school, make sure that at that IEP meeting, the team is taking time to discuss what their post-secondary goals are and what transition services they're receiving. And if they haven't done a transition assessment, or the one they've done doesn't provide enough information and you're not really sure what the student wants or needs, ask for a more thorough transition assessment, either through the IE process or requesting a level 2 or level 3 vocational assessment. It's really important to make sure that time is held for this conversation. And every high school also has a transition team leader, otherwise known as a TTL. You can always request a follow-up meeting with the TTL if they are not at the IEP meeting, or if they are, in order to have a further, more comprehensive conversation about the student's transition needs and what services they'll be getting. And you can always ask your school's principal to tell you who the TTL for your child's school is. At the IEP meeting, the DOE also is required to include outside agencies if appropriate. This means that they have the legal obligation to invite agency representatives who can provide transition services to the student. For example, most commonly Access VR and OPWDD. And if they can't attend, the DOE must take steps to include them in transition planning. We almost never see this happen. And you as the parent and advocate can also invite these folks to join the IEP meeting. And likely that might be the only way to get them to join. But know that the DOE does technically have this legal obligation, and you can always remind them, hey, I really want my student to receive Access VR. Can you please invite the school's Access VR liaison to the meeting so that we can discuss that process. And finally, it's also really important to include the student in this process. It's not always appropriate to invite the student to the IEP meeting, and obviously that is left to the advocates and the parents' discretion. That said, transition planning really does work best when students are involved. So even if the student is not sitting in on the IEP meeting, as they get older and are in high school and their transition planning and goals are being discussed at these meetings, it's really important to help work with the student to make them feel comfortable speaking up for themselves, because once they leave high school, advocacy around accommodations and supports really falls on the individual. So this can look like sitting down with the student, reading their IEP with them or parts of their IEP with them, helping them understand what their disability is, helping them understand what their strengths, interests are, what are realistic goals for them, letting them see on their IEP and let them know what are accommodations that they will need and that are really important for them to ask for moving forward, and to practice their independence by advocating for those things by themselves as they need them. Obviously, this can be a gradual process, but I just want to highlight that it is really important, to the extent feasible, to have the student involved in this process, even if not at the IEP meeting itself. Okay, one more important thing to talk about at the IEP meeting is your student's graduation pathway. So obviously this is really closely connected to transition planning, because if you don't know what your student is leaving high school with, you don't know what opportunities are going to be available to them. The regulations say that the DOE has to provide graduation requirements in writing. They never do, but why not ask for them? And also, this is a helpful way to confirm if your student will leave high school with a diploma or with a non-diploma credential. This is also the time and place for the DOE to discuss with you what the safety net options are as a student with a disability, and also to discuss your child's progress towards their graduation goals. So linked below is the guide to high school graduation options for students with IEPs. It's an AFC guide that walks through what those safety net options are, as well as the different possibilities for what you can exit high school with. But just for a quick refresher, on the left side of the screen are all diplomas. They all serve as a high school diploma. The last one refers to the GED. All of them can get you into college, into a job that requires a high school diploma, and to enlist in the military. On the right are non-diploma credentials. These will not allow you to apply for college. They will not be enough to apply for a job that requires a high school diploma. You cannot use them to enlist in the military. These used to be called IEP diplomas, and they no longer are. They are called what we abbreviate as the CDAS credential or the SAC credential. And if you're not sure which track your student is on, you can always look on the IEP to find out that information. So in about in the third to last or fourth to last page of the IEP, typically there is a box that says participate in state and district-wide assessments. If the first box, number 1 here, is checked off, that means that your student is participating in the same state and district-wide assessment, which means they are working towards a diploma. If the second box is checked off, that means the student is participating in alternate assessments and they are not working towards a diploma. So if you're ever not sure, 1, you can always raise it with the IEP team, but 2, you can always also look at your student's IEP to see. Finally, a really helpful tool when going to an IEP meeting where you want to discuss transition is a checklist that we have, which also can be found in our guide to transition services linked below, which really walks you through what you want to make sure is being discussed at each IEP meeting as your child moves through high school. So this is the first page of the checklist, and here is the second page. And again, you can find it at the link right here in a more approachable form, and can always be printed and brought to an IEP meeting. Okay, that was a lot of information, so I'm going to pause for questions. I see that there's one in the Q&A from Jenna. Okay. I see that this is a statement about the OPWDD life plan meetings, that they sometimes will not be the meeting if they're not in the life. Okay. I think this is a helpful tip, Jenna. I'm not sure if this is tied to a question, but I'm happy to answer. It seems like perhaps OPWDD wants to make sure that the student is involved as well, which is another reason why it's really important to work on self-advocacy with the student. Okay. Question from, okay. To answer Alethea's question, yes, you will be provided a copy of the slides after the presentation, and this is also being recorded, and you'll be shared a copy of the recording as well. To answer Dr. Viccaria's question, where do families get IE transition assessments? Who does these? It's a really great question, and unfortunately, there's not a lot of great answers. you can always reach out to our team. We are happy to guide you to providers who do conduct these assessments. I think the most important point that I often tell families is you want to make sure that the IEE for a transition assessment likely needs to be anywhere from $3,500 to $5,000. Each of those IEEs comes with a dollar amount tied to it, and you want to make sure that that dollar amount reflects somewhere in that range, because that's often what providers require. New York Therapy Placement Services is a place that provides them. There's also some individual providers that we work with to provide these assessments, and I'm happy to share that information after the presentation. Also, you can always tell the DOE, hey, identify a provider for me. And it is technically their responsibility to provide the family a list of providers. Of course, that does not always happen, but if it doesn't happen, reach out to our helpline or reach out to us on our website or reach out to the three of us directly, and we can help escalate that.
They're also asking about, can you provide some examples of level 2 assessments?
Yes. So the tricky thing is, the DOE, I've never actually seen the DOE do a level 2 assessment that is in line with what the regulations say it should be. Typically, they provide what's called the ideas interest inventory. We can provide a redacted version of what that looks like to the audience so that you know what to look out for. And if you get this, you can say, hey, this isn't actually a level 2. And then we can also work to provide, we can send a few examples of what the transition assessments look like when we send around the slides, just to give a sense of like what to be on the lookout for. And I'll also share around at that time a version of an independent assessment, so you know like how much more detail you can get when you use or when you request an IEE for a transition assessment. Okay, I think that's it for now. Yep. Okay, great. So I am now going to go on to the next slide, and I will be passing it off to Alex to review transition services.
Thanks, Juliet. Can you guys hear me okay? Yep, cool. So I'm going to be talking about transition services, and transition services are a combination of resources that can help you do transition planning, and then the substance of what that transition planning may include, whether that's work-based learning opportunities or internships or things like that. So next slide, please. First, we're going to be talking about the DOE's Transition and College Access Center, called TCACs. These are kind of new. I mean, they're not that new. They were started by the Department of Education a few years ago. There's one in every borough. There are specific centers for students with disabilities that focus on transition planning. We will provide, and you can click on the link when you get the slide, the information to the TCAC in every borough. And some of the services that they provide are college prep resources, helping you connect to social services, or other kinds of support that you might need with transition. They run certain internship and work-based learning programs, and I'll talk a little bit more about them further in this presentation. They also do some very important functions for the DOE staff who work in schools. They do trainings for transition team leaders. They do trainings for other DOE staff who are helping at the school level with transition. There's a couple more services that they provide. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, here we go. Sorry, it was out of order. They also do workshops for families and communities, for families in the community. So sometimes they'll do workshops based on a college search or self-advocacy, and those are kind of shared through their internal channels that families and students can participate in. They also do individual consultancies, which could be a really great resource. You know, you can come in with you and your student and talk about what's your specific needs, what are your specific challenges, and they can help and provide customized information that maybe you could take back to your IEP team, or it's something you can pursue on your own. Also, the TCACs do operate and generally oversee the TOP program, which I'll talk about in a few slides. and also the SYEP program, which are internship-based programs within the DOE. And importantly, you can also get PREATS, pre-employment transition services, through the TCACs. This is a group of a couple courses that you generally do through Access VR. Access VR funds them, but they're career exploration courses. They help students understand and think about what do they want to do, what career do they want to go into, and also experience like certain community-based exploration activities. So that's the TCACs. Go back one slide, please. Thank you. So, moving on to our next topic, we're going to be talking about some training internship program, work-based learning program. So obviously your child, your student is doing all kinds of activities and learning and instruction within the school setting. And then we're going to be talking about things that they either do after school, through the DOE, or otherwise. So first, we're going to be starting with some programs that exist within District 75. So there's something called Project Search, which is run through AHRC, and it is an opportunity specifically for students with intellectual and developmental disabilities to have a whole year internship program connected to an employer, and it's really a way for them to bridge and transition into employment opportunities. And it's specifically available at District 75. District 75 also runs, and I'm going to not go through all these, but they also run a paraprofessional and teacher aid program, a food internship program, and a CVS internship program. These are all things that you can reach out to the District 75 transition office, or things that are of you can talk to your school specifically. The food internship program prepare students for food service or working in the food industry. The paraprofessional program is really nice because at the end, you could become a paraprofessional or an aide at District 75 or in a DOE school. So this is just something to think about. There are more programs. We just wanted to give you an understanding of what a transition program might look like. Next slide, please. So these are programs that are similar, but they are not run by the DOE. These are community-based organizations that are providing either internships or work-based learning programs. For example, Yes She Can, which is actually a program that's slightly outside of New York City. I believe it's in Westchester, but it's a program that kids with disabilities will learn retail training, how to work in a store, what sales look like, and things like that. And it has both a training component as well as you can actually work and get paid if you complete the program. Epic Players is a theater company for young people with developmental disabilities. It has educational components where you can take classes. It also has after-school programs, internships, and obviously your student could become an actor or performer through this program. And the last two are Nicholas Center provides things like supported employment, skills building program, and things like that. And it does work with OPWD. And ICD is generally a vocational or trade school that has various job certifications and has a lot of support for people with disabilities. And a lot of times it's funded by Access VR. So this is meant to give you just an example of some programs outside the DOE that are short of employment. So, and we're not talking about college. We are going to be doing a college webinar. This is a 4-part series that's running through next year that AFC is doing on transition. We're going to have one specifically based on college and college access, but this is specifically kind of internship, work-based learning opportunities and programs and instruction that can help you, kind of bridge the gap and prepare whether you are going to college as the next step, whether you're going to employment or other things. Next slide, please. So this is just to give you a little bit more information about DOE specific internships, both SYEP and TOP. A lot of you are familiar with SYEP. Thousands and thousands of students participate. It's the Summer Youth Employment Program. It runs over the summer. Just a quick note about that. You could work through your school or you can work through the TCAC. SYEP has been getting so full over the last few years that even getting in can be a challenge, but students who are in foster care, disabilities, or other groups through their school or through the TCACs can get priority. So we encourage you to apply and try that out. Also, the TOP program. TOP is a unique paid work-based learning internship that is school-based, but it is year-round. It is operated during school, and you can work up to 10 hours a week. and you get paid for that. And there's many different opportunities to do that kind of paid internship. As you see here, generally these programs are for students who are 14 to 24, and it helps you earn credit towards the CDOS. So certainly reach out to the TCACs if you're interested in these, and a lot of times your school also will be able to help you to apply. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk about a little bit about vocational training, co-op tech. Technically, this all falls into the category of CTE, career and technical education. These are programs that really help you develop a skill in a trade or do vocational training and really prepare you to get a specific certification and then go to work directly in industry, in a union, in a skilled trade. Industry, a lot of students with disabilities do take advantage of these programs. We recently visited Co-op Tech, the main campus on 96th Street, and it was a really great environment. They have really great facilities where you can, work in the kitchen, work, building a house and different kind of trades. Generally, this is a half-day program for students who are 17 to 21, meaning they do this after they finish at their primary school. So at their primary high school is where they do academic instruction, and then they'll go to a co-op tech site. There's co-op tech sites throughout the city, generally in every borough. There's a night program element to co-op tech as well for students who are over 22 and might be interested. Here we just have listed 2 or 3 certifications, but they have over 20 different programs across many different skills and trades. And it's a really great thing. And a lot of times they don't have every special education support, but you can get a lot of supports that you need at certain campuses. And we definitely, if you're interested in a skill or a trade or working somehow in a union, it's a great opportunity. Next slide, please. So we're going to finish off with just a few slides on employment and then leave some time for questions. So, sorry about that. So we're going to talk about a couple different types of employment, but the first one is competitive employment. Competitive employment is what we all know most commonly, right? That is where you apply, you give your resume, the employer interviews several candidates, and they select whoever they think is the best candidate for the job. Obviously, students and young adults with disabilities sometimes need help through that process. We're giving you 2 resources here. Bridges to Work is a great nonprofit employment agency that helps young adults from 17 to 24 years old. They help find jobs. They help you get job ready. They give you job coaching. They prepare you for the resume and things like that. And they're a really great resource to help you prepare and get you through the whole process. NYC at Work is specifically run through the mayor's office for people with disabilities. Similarly, it helps you get prepared, but one of the most unique parts of NYC at Work is that they have very deep connections to New York City agencies. So if for whatever reason you're particularly interested in a government job, or there's or if that's a path you see for yourself, NYC at Work has lots and lots of access to the array of city agencies and being placed in internships at the MTA, at Department of City Administrative Services, many different kinds. So these are 2 resources. There are many more. We're just highlighting 2 for competitive employment. Next slide, please. So these are 2 resources specifically for customized and supported employment. So what's the difference between customized and supported employment? Supported employment is often made in reference to students who might have intellectual or developmental disabilities. They work with an organization that identifies a specific job that would be right for them based on their interests and abilities. And oftentimes you have a job coach or someone else supporting you at that work environment. So it's you working, you receiving a wage, but the organization, you often through OPWDD, provide an additional level of support. And last but not least, we have JobPath, which is specific for customized employment. JobPath works with many different partners across the city, and they will work with you to create a specific customized job that is for you. So an employer has a specific need, you have a specific skill set, they customize that job so it's for you. So it's not through the supported, you're not necessarily getting a job coach or any kind of on-the-job additional training, and you're not going through a competitive route, but that job is created for you, and it helps a lot of young adults with disabilities find really great jobs. JobPath's been doing this for a while, and it's been an incredibly successful program. And you generally do work through Access VR or OPWDD in both cases, support and customized employment. So with that, I'll pass it back to Juliet to close us out. And thanks all. Thank you all.
Okay, so because we are running out of time, I'm going to bring us to the end. Are there any, I just saw a quick question in the chat. Yes, we will be sending, as long as you used your email to register for this webinar, you will be getting all of the materials that you see here today. I'll take a few seconds to see if there are any final questions I can answer. And while I'm doing that, a quick plug to please fill out this survey. It's just a few questions. I am going to drop the link to it in the chat if I can figure out how to do that. And otherwise, if I cannot, we will share that with you. Oh, here we go. Okay. Okay, link is being dropped in the chat. It's very quick. It helps us a ton to see what we're doing well, what we could be more clear on. So if you can take a few moments to fill it out, we would greatly appreciate it. And of course, if you have any questions, call our helpline. You can reach us at info@advocatesforchildren.com or sorry, .org, yikes. And also, there is a form you can fill out on our website for help as well. And finally, if you want to hear more from us, sign up to get our monthly updates in your inbox. We talk about different relevant education, timelines, due dates in New York City. We share Know Your Rights materials, any changes in the law, and we give alerts as to our future workshops. So I will leave us there. I don't see any more questions in the chat, and we are reaching exactly 5 p.m. I know there was a lot of information to pack into a short time, and as I said at the top, transition planning looks really different for every student, but we hope that this presentation gives some tools about how to best advocate for the students that you're working with. And as Alex mentioned, this is the first in a 4-part series. We're also doing webinars on accommodations in college, on Access VR and OPWDD, on guardianship and adult decision making. So information about those will all be circulated in our bulletin, which it does say monthly here, but it's actually weekly now. So I will have to update that, but don't hesitate to reach out to us with any questions. Okay, and with that, I think we will end the presentation. Thank you all for joining us.